Had the ark been a long rectangle, it would have capsized in a rough sea. The formation that lies in the mountains of Ararat appears to have been shaped like the Egyptian boats that sailed the Nile thousands of years ago, great uplifted ends curling inward and anchored to the deck, providing structural strength. It would be thousands of years before man could build another ship to equal its dimensions. It was more than half the size of the Queen Mary. When checking with metal detectors, a series of foundation stones were discovered along each side of the bow. These platforms are precisely where they need to be to support compression poles fastened to the tip of an uplifted arch. It is inconceivable that the placement of these structures could be a random accident of nature. One of the startling features of the ark's design was the existence of what today's shipbuilders call a moon pool. It was a large rectangular hole with sides deliberately built into the center of the ship, much like our present-day salvage vessels, which can raise objects through the middle of their hulls. This device could have performed several important functions. Water trapped inside the pool would be dragged along with the ship and act as a hydraulic brake to slow it down. Rainwater falling on the upper structure could have been diverted for the purpose of cleaning out animal compartments, with the debris washed down through the center. The rising and falling of waves inside the moon pool would have acted like a piston, moving the air up and down, in and out, functioning as a ventilating system for the interior chambers. The moon pool also served to relieve stress on the ship as it rode across cresting waves. This was accomplished by allowing some of the water to push up into the opening rather than raising the entire hull. Without this feature, a ship that large would have straddled the waves, and its ends would have sagged from gravity as they extended into the air. It was soon realized that the design of Noah's Ark was based upon two mathematical concepts known as pi and phi. Pi is the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter, and when carried to only 3 digits, is expressed as 3.142. Phi, also called the golden ratio or the golden rectangle, is the number obtained by adding 1 to the square root of 5 and then dividing by 2. Rounded off to 3 digits, it's expressed as 1.618. The golden ratio shows up in many natural formations, such as the arrangement of the seeds in a sunflower and the curve of horns on a ram. It's particularly common in formations related to water. It mathematically describes the spiral of a nautilus seashell and the inside of a breaking wave. It is used today in the construction of ships' hulls to minimize water turbulence. The ratios of pi and phi are evident in every major aspect of the ark's construction. Precise mathematical relationships of this kind are not the result of chance. Yet here in this design there is not just one such relationship, but 5. There can be little doubt that this structure was built by man, and whoever designed it applied principles of mathematics and hydrodynamics that were not fully known again for almost 5,000 years.
If you superscribe a rectangle around the shape as it lays out there now, if you divide the actual area of the artifact into that rectangle, you get 1.618 phi. If you divide that area by the length, and you got to be sitting down for this one. If you say that the length is 300 cubits, you divide that length into the area of the deck, you get 49.7 cubits. The average width of the artifact is 50 cubits. So I don't believe in coincidence. I'm reasonably certain the Bible's accurate on that point, that 30 or 31, but we're near 30, or we're at 30 cubits. For depth, we're at 50 cubits for average width, and we're at 300 cubits for length. So I think it's the artifact. I think this was Noah's Ark.
It's commonly assumed that the ark was made entirely of wood. This appears to be confirmed in Genesis, which according to most translations says it was made of gopher wood. But the word gopher was taken from the original Hebrew without any knowledge of what it meant. In fact, it didn't necessarily mean wood at all. The word wood was added centuries later by a translator. The New English Bible is more specific. It says the ark was covered with reeds, and there's much evidence to support that conclusion. During the early 1900s, in the days of the great ocean sailing ships, builders learned that the longest wooden vessel that could withstand rough seas was about 300 feet. Anything over that would flex and twist until its joints would loosen or come apart completely. The longest wooden ship ever put into service was the Wyoming, the last of the six-masted freighters. At 330 feet, she was considered to be untrustworthy. The structure that lies in the mountains of Ararat is almost twice as long as the Wyoming. It's likely that wooden timbers were used for upright supports and flooring, but the area below the main deck appears to have been made primarily of reeds. Today there are stone-like pieces near the formation which show impressions of reed-like structures on the surface. They have a hollow sound when struck, and they appear to be a manufactured stone composed of layers of different materials. Many of the ancient texts agree that the ark was covered with some kind of substance, probably to make it watertight and to bind the reeds together. Translators use the words pitch or tar. Some call it bitumen. All three words mean essentially the same thing, a natural tar that oozes out of the ground. But that was separate from what was called oil, which also was used. It has been assumed that this was an organic oil derived from plants or tree sap. The fossil remains that can be seen today confirm that legend. The reeds appear to have been plastered on the inside with an organic resinous oil and layered on the outside with a mixture of pumice, natural tar, and natron, forming a kind of asphalt cement that would have been well suited for its task. One of the ancient Hebrew words for a covering of this kind is kafar, or in English, gopher. There are different accounts of how many humans and what kind of animals were aboard the ark. The book of Genesis identifies 8 people, including Noah, his wife, and his sons and their wives. Some have said that because only 8 were mentioned, there couldn't possibly have been anyone else. But that may be a premature conclusion, considering the size of the vessel and the work required to tend animals and handle anchor stones. The Quran says that Noah took aboard all believers, although few in number. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim loaded all his relatives, his craftsmen, and their children on board, and even identified his boatman by name as Puzur Amuru. It is not difficult to imagine his vessel staffed with a large and hard-working crew. We are told in Genesis that Noah was to bring on board 2 of every kind of animal. It didn't say whether this was every kind in the entire world, or every kind that was natural to the local area, or every kind that served a purpose for Noah. And since it didn't specify, the common assumption has been that it meant the entire world. And that has become the basis of the typical Sunday school image of the ark as a kind of floating zoo. This interpretation has led many people to reject the entire story. It's difficult to believe that creatures which existed on the other side of the planet would be able to reach the ark, walking and swimming literally halfway around the earth. The solution to this puzzle may have been found in the Sumerian and Babylonian tablets. They tell us that the purpose of animals aboard the ark was not to preserve every creature on the planet, but to provide food and clothing for Noah and his crew. Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh that he took only farm animals, those that eat grass and would remain at his door. Early editions of the Old Testament were in agreement with that view. The King James Version mentions birds and creeping things, but the only animals specifically named were cattle, nothing else. It wasn't until more recent times that translators and revision committees began to interpret the text to conform to the popular image.